Hey everyone, welcome to Middle Fantasy. I'm Zack, and I'm still a little sore. Last weekend I did my Spartan race, and yeah, woo! That's I don't know where I was during that, but I was doing something. Journey before destination, and because of this, for the last 3 days, I could barely walk. I was like beyond sore. I had muscles that I didn't even know I had muscles for. And because of that, I was kind of bedridden. And what I decided to do was read some fantasy books. And it got me thinking because actually I couldn't really move my arms all that much. It was just like really hard to actually hold the book. I actually had to have it on my side. And it made me think about why do I like big fantasy books? Why do I like things that are heavy? And I'm sure a lot of the time it's a bunch of intimidation for a lot of people. And thinking about that just from the sheer weight and girth and size, that maybe I want to do like a tip video kind of talking about my 5 tips when reading giant epic fantasy that is 500 plus pages, because I think a lot of the time people have this hurdle, especially when it comes to series like the Stormlight Archive, the Name of the Wind, pretty much Wheel of Time. Just I can go on and on and on, and just how when you have a book this thick, these chunky boys, what are some tips? So here are my top 5 tips for helping to alleviate maybe some of the stress or worry about jumping into one of these series. Tip number 1: pace yourself. When it comes to a giant sprawling world, especially when it comes to an author that wants to write 1,000 pages, may it be like A Song of Ice and Fire, The Stormlight Archive, The King Killer Chronicle, or even Mistborn to an extent, you want to pace yourself. I see a lot of time when people want to read these giant sprawling books, they like hit the ground running and just start reading it, and then they kind of give up 100 or 200 pages in because nothing's really happening. And I think that's kind of the point somewhat of the series, is that it's supposed to be, I don't really like using this word even though I've probably used it a lot, a slow burn, meaning that the author's taking their time really setting up the world, because compared to other series where you have different worlds, you have this elaborate world building, the author has to explain all that. It isn't necessarily our world. If we're reading something like the Dresden Files, you understand what the heck the yellow pages are. Actually, maybe not anymore, but you understand kind of concepts of our world like Coca-Cola and cold showers. When an author's trying to establish things like the Night's Watch, what, pretty much is the law of the land, who is King Robert, or who are the Targaryens, you need to kind of necessarily take your time with that. And I see this especially when it comes to giant books like this. A lot of the time, the reason why these books are so big is to elaborate the detail. So when you're reading a book and trying to like power through it, sometimes that's not necessarily the best thing to do. Maybe you want to just slow down and take your time, because when it comes to these books, you're going to be losing a lot more detail than just, blazing through it at light neck speed. And I recommend just taking your time. It isn't a race. You're not competing against anyone. This isn't like a readathon. Do they have speed reading competitions? So, tip number 2: get comfortable. When it comes to a giant book, you kind of want to get comfortable. How I do this, especially when it comes to me, is actually a couple ways, and some of them are practical, and some of them people have told me is blasphemous. So for me, when it comes to a giant book that you're getting in a physical version of it, doesn't matter if it's 400 pages to 1,000 pages, your wrists are gonna get super duper tired. Now, what I usually like to do is I like to actually just, if I'm reading it, read it on a table or read it in a place where you can actually put the book down, because you are going to be having, it's almost like a sports thing. Again, I just ran up all of Angel Stadium. You need to have endurance. If you don't have endurance and you're just holding the book up either like this or holding it like this, you either one, you're gonna drop the book and you're gonna crush your head like a melon, or your wrists are gonna snap, or you're gonna get tired, and you're gonna focus more on the pain in the wrists than you are the content of the story. So having it propped up in this way actually really, really does help. Now, when it comes to a blasphemous thing that I'll say is that for me, I actually have a word count limit for the most part. What I mean by that is if the book is over so many words where the pages go into the thousands, I'm probably not going to read the physical version of the book. I'm actually going to read a Kindle version or an ebook version, just because it's a matter of weight versus practicality in many ways. And for me, I'd rather have practicality, especially when it's a 1,000 page book like The Way of Kings or even like Oathbringer or Rhythm of War. It's easier to read it as an ebook than it is to have it as a physical book because you have to bring that with you, and it isn't really pocket size. That deserves its own pocket. And yeah, I do wear cargo shorts, but even my cargo shorts don't have that much room for those giant mamma jamma books. So sometimes it's okay to get an ebook or even an audiobook if that's something that really does help. And for me, that's kind of like the tip too. It helps with that endurance. It helps with the wrist stuff, and especially at night when my eyes, I want to turn all my lights off, but I kind of want to focus on it. Don't want to have a reading light. That backlight for whatever device you use is going to be a godsend. So for my third tip, I recommend actually looking at the back of the book first to see if there's a glossary or something that helps with detailing of the world in many ways. A lot of fantasy books kind of have glossaries and just ways to figure out the book. But if there's not, there's a lot of great resources. What I like to do on Google, and maybe I should preface this by saying this is what I do, and you have to be careful of spoilers, I guess. But you type in like spoiler-free character sheet or non-spoiler. Make sure that's first thing. Just put non-spoiler and see if you can find like a terminology or things like that if the book doesn't provide it, because it's going to help you a whole lot. I loved it in A Song of Ice and Fire. In the Stormlight Archive, it really helps with the magic system. Heck, even in The Name of the Wind, when you have the 10th anniversary edition, it comes with like this huge glossary in the back of just explaining things and how to pronounce things. And it is so helpful. I could not have gotten through Dune or even portions of Wheel of Time without that glossary. So I recommend looking at it. It doesn't take away from the story. The way that I look at it is it's supposed to be there to help the reader. And the author's job is to kind of take that glossary and what is spoilery and what isn't spoilery is what I kind of like about it is it gives you just enough details where you're not going to be spoiled by something, but if the author is just spoiling things, it's probably there for a specific reason, or it's something that either you should know, or it's something like you don't have to necessarily once I finish the book, I can do the reading. It's one of these things like for me, I switch both on and off, especially for Wheel of Time, where I'll read the glossary first before I start reading the book. Same as when it comes to pretty much, oh god, Malazan Book of the Fallen. I've only read the first book, but I love the glossary that has there as one for characters and then concepts, and I'm sure I got that name wrong. I only read the first book. I am so sorry, everyone. You can take me out back later and shoot me, I guess. But that's me. Is glossaries are going to be your friend. Number 4. Now this applies again with the glossary, but sometimes if you're confused about something, for me, I've done this a lot of times, especially the first time I really did this was reading A Song of Ice and Fire for the first time, but looking up summaries of chapters that are non-spoilery. There are plenty of resources. I actually found one for Wheel of Time, The King Killer Chronicle, Stormlight Archive that don't necessarily spoil things. You just have to be careful with that because for me, sometimes a concept or a whole chapter might just blur together. You're not sure who this character is or this is. The glossary is nice, but sometimes you might not understand something they're just completely talking about. And having almost a non-spoilery summary sometimes really does help. There are a lot of resources on the internet. Again, you have to put non-spoiler or you might get spoiled. For me, the first time that I read A Song of Ice and Fire, I needed this because I didn't know what was what because I was still kind of fresh-faced when it comes to fantasy at that time, many moons ago. And it really does help, and especially when it comes to an enjoyment of a book. Some people, you don't necessarily need it and you get things wholeheartedly and you can plow through a book and it's just something that just wallpaper. But to other people, for me, like me myself, sometimes I'm so distracted or I'm reading something and I don't necessarily, I think I get the idea of it, but I might be interpreting it a different way, and having like a non-spoilery summary really does help. And for me, it makes enjoyment of epic fantasy in this way of like you don't necessarily have to, not, I guess it would be the spark notes a little bit and how they have those, okay, this is what happened this chapter. It's great for when you have to retell events that happen, like you're like in the 4th book and they talk about something in the 2nd book, like what's this? You have to go back and kind of figure things out. This is where that summary works so well, and I absolutely love it when it comes to 1,000-page, 3,000-page book. I love it so much. And number 5. I think this is going to be pretty much the exact same as number 1. It's not a race. You shouldn't necessarily have to compare yourself to how other people read books. I know people that read Wheel of Time in 2 years. I know someone that read it in 1 month. It's one of these things where how you read shouldn't dictate how you enjoy the book in many ways. I think for me, taking my time through the Wheel of Time has made me appreciate it a lot more. Same as with the Stormlight Archive. It took me almost a full 6 months to read all the books in just a very, very slow time because, when you're going into a brand new world and you have to understand these concepts and ideas, and also time gets in the way, life gets in the way, you don't necessarily need to make the book your chore, pretty much your full-time job. It's something you're supposed to relax unless you're doing something like I'm doing. I'm supposed to be reading books and figuring out and being like, I gotta read. But you don't necessarily have to do that in this situation. It's okay to take your time, take your breaks, look at the glossary, look at summaries. And again, don't compare yourself to other people, especially like I've read 4 series this day and someone on Twitter says this. It's okay to pace yourself and take breaks and ask questions. And I think that's going to make the book more enjoyable because the way that I think about it is when people like binge read books super fast is you're taking someone's idea which they quintessentially could have spent years, months, decades on in a matter of 4 hours to 3 days, and you're kind of missing some of the points or kind of some of the nuances or maybe even things that while you're reading it you might find different appreciation. You're blurring through it, whereas some people might take their time, take notes, think about something. Both those options are fine. I'm not saying speed reading's a bad thing, but some people can do it, some people can't. You don't have to compare yourself to other people, and I think that's going to make a huge difference, especially when it comes to reading a book and enjoying a book. Everyone can enjoy books differently. Some people like it as an audiobook. There are a lot of books that I listen to as audiobooks, and it works just as fine as reading it. Sometimes I pick up new things when I listen to an audiobook. It's okay to get it as a ebook if that's like the comfort thing, and also you can take your time. You can make the words bigger or smaller, and you can have a physical book, and you can keep it with you. You don't have to plug it in at night, and it's wonderful. But it's just one of those things. It's not a race. You pace yourself, and by the end, you're going to enjoy a sprawling series. And I think for me, that's all you really want to do, especially when you read. It isn't necessarily a chore, unless you're doing like when you're in elementary school or in middle school where you had to do the reading sheet, and if you completed all your reading activities, you got a Pizza Hut pizza party where you got your personal panned pizza, which was almost like molten lava, but you ate it anyways because it was free, and you read a whole bunch of Harry Potter or Series of Unfortunate Events or Percy Jackson. Wait a second, I think I'm just talking about my life story now, but you see what I mean. Well, I hope these tips kind of help. I hope you all enjoyed this. Well, thank you all so much, everyone. If you found this video helpful, maybe consider subscribing down below. I would really appreciate that. Give it a thumbs up. What about you? Do you have tips for kind of helping with giant epic fantasy books that are thicker than oatmeal in many ways? I would love to hear you all. Well, everyone, thank you all so much. And, like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya.